Well, we'll go ahead and get started then. My name is Mark Doles. I'm a pharmacist with Mount Carmel Health Partners. And today I'll be providing an overview of biosimilars. The objectives for this presentation are to provide a general definition of biologics and biosimilar drugs, to introduce the concepts and terminology of biosimilars, and to overview the current state of approved biosimilars as well as what's in the pipeline. Before we can really talk about biosimilars, we need to first take a step back and talk about biologic drugs in general, because biosimilars really are a subset of biologic drugs. So biologic drugs, it's a diverse group of complex compounds. They're usually produced through biotechnology rather than kind of traditional organic chemistry techniques. They usually provide much more specific therapeutic targeting than with small molecule drugs. The image on the left side of the screen conveys the difference in complexity of a biologic medicine, such as a monoclonal antibody, compared with a traditional small molecule drug like aspirin. Other examples of biologic medicines besides monoclonal antibodies are therapeutic proteins, vaccines, and of note too, insulins, which were classified as biologics in 2020. Another component of biologic medicines is their high cost, which is both to the patient as well as the healthcare system as a whole. This report, published in 2021 from the AARP Public Policy Institute, found that the annual cost of a single specialty prescription drug was over $80,000. Certainly not all specialty medications would necessarily be considered biologics, but many biologics do fit into this category, and kind of points out some of the barriers that patients have with accessing these medications. Part of the reason for the high cost of biologic drugs is the lack of competition from lower cost alternatives. So for a brand name small molecule medication, which eventually experiences patent expiration, that results in competitor generics. And small molecule drugs are small enough to be exactly reproduced. We can exactly define the active ingredient. And then really the expectation of a generic drug, it would be to have the identical active ingredient to its reference product. But since biologic medicines are so complex, they cannot be exactly replicated. With traditional regulatory pathways, then it's nearly, if not totally impossible to create a generic version of a biologic medicine. And so really we needed a new pathway, something different for biologics. This is the importance of which medications are designated as biologic, because based on that designation, then the pathway for a lower cost alternative is really to create a biosimilar. A biosimilar is a biologic product, but it references an originator biologic medicine. The expectations are a little bit different than what we traditionally think of with small molecule drugs. And really the expectation here is that a biosimilar, instead of being identical, is highly similar to the reference product in terms of its molecular structure and bioactivity. We should see no clinically meaningful differences from the reference product in terms of safety, purity, effectiveness. And just like generic medicines, biosimilars also undergo rigorous testing by the FDA. And so this slide kind of just depicts the difference between a generic medicine versus a biosimilar. For a generic medicine, a generic small molecule, I should say, we can specifically define the chemical structure, and through traditional kind of organic chemistry methods, create an identical active ingredient. And then the generic manufacturer also needs to demonstrate that that is bioequivalent to the reference product. Whereas a biosimilar now, the production pathway is much more complex, which also contributes to the higher cost of developing biosimilar medicines versus small molecule medicines. And the goals with a biosimilar medicine, as defined by FDA, is to create a highly similar active ingredient, but it should have equal efficacy and safety in a head-to-head trial with the reference product in human subjects. And so to kind of justify in our minds whether this goal of high similarity rather than being identical is reasonable, I think that this graphic from FDA really well describes the situation. Here you can see that for a reference product, there are minor changes that can occur during the production of the product in this kind of living system that they're created through, maybe through yeast or E. coli or some other living organism is producing this molecule. And in this case, the example is a monoclonal antibody. And even if the active site stays the same, stays identical, you can get these post-translational modifications, such as glycosylation, which changes technically what the molecule will be defined as. It's up to FDA and the manufacturer to ensure that any sorts of post-translational modifications like this that would be allowable don't impact the active site and don't therefore impact the efficacy and safety of the medicine. But you can see this picture kind of depicts the glycosylation patterns with different colored diamonds, and it just shows that for the reference product, kind of over on the left-hand side, there's batch-to-batch variability. So if I was prescribed this medicine, I would potentially be getting kind of a different mixture of molecules in my first prescription, which maybe came from lot 1, versus my second prescription, which maybe came from lot 2. So that's allowable and expected, and that's what happens with the reference product. So with biosimilar medications, then the goal, in a way, to kind of say it a different way, so we're striving for highly similar, and really a way to think about that would be that you're targeting something that has the same sort of allowable batch-to-batch variability as you would see in the reference product, where maybe from lot to lot you look across and the glycosylation patterns are a little bit different between the reference product and the biosimilar product, but between lot variability is the same as you would expect with the reference product as with the biosimilar product. The final thing to kind of point out here is that with all of this new pathway, FDA created some multiple designations for these medications. So the first designation would be biosimilar, which is kind of what we've been talking about here. So anything approved through the biosimilar pathway would be designated, generally speaking, as a biosimilar. An additional designation kind of on top of that would be interchangeable biosimilar. So to be an interchangeable biosimilar, the manufacturer had to design their studies in such a way that the patients experienced switching between reference product and the biosimilar multiple times throughout the study to show that switching multiple times back and forth doesn't impact safety or efficacy. Really, this is somewhat of a regulatory designation and really impacts the patient's access to the medicine. It gives the ability potentially for pharmacists to be able to substitute a brand name product for an interchangeable biosimilar much in the way they would a traditional generic. But I have some slides a little bit later that will describe that in more detail. The last designation is authorized biologic. And so this is really for those situations where a manufacturer might decide to make available an unlabeled version of their product or an unbranded version of the product. So the product itself would only bear the proper or generic name of the medicine. It wouldn't include the brand name. What we see potentially happening is this is an opportunity for lots of things to happen, but in particular, it's an opportunity for the manufacturer of the originator product to have competition with a lower cost alternative in a market when biosimilars come to market as well. So now I'll move into describing a little bit more about interchangeability and substitution, because this will potentially directly impact providers as they're prescribing these medicines. So This first example is what we're used to. This is an example small molecule medication, carvedilol. If the prescriber writes a prescription for the brand name Coreg, 3.125 milligram tablets, then the patient takes that prescription to the pharmacy, and the pharmacist can dispense, per Ohio law, the brand name product, which is depicted over on the left. That's what the pill would look like that the patient would receive. Or the pharmacist can substitute any of the AB-rated generic products. And there's quite a few on the market for carvedilol 3.125 milligram tablets, and I've pictured them here. And so the patient might receive any of those medications that are depicted here. They're all carvedilol 3.125 milligram tablets. But the pharmacist doesn't have to first get approval from the provider. If the prescription was written for Coreg 3.125 milligrams, they're allowed to substitute that. With this new landscape of biologics and biosimilars, especially with insulins being designated as biologics, we expect that the biosimilars that come to market would directly impact primary care providers, and not just specialists who would be prescribing like oncology medications or something like that. So if a provider writes a prescription for Lantus, which is a reference originator insulin, then the pharmacist could dispense the brand name Lantus as designated on the prescription, or they could substitute for any interchangeable biosimilars that are available. And currently on the market, there is one interchangeable biosimilar to Lantus, which is Semglee. The pharmacist could not dispense without first clarifying any biosimilars that haven't achieved the interchangeable designation. So for Lantus, there's one biosimilar approved, Resvoglar, although it's not yet available. But once that product is available, if, say, the insurance company preferred that product and the provider wrote a prescription for Lantus, the pharmacist would first have to get a new prescription or authorization from the prescriber to change Lantus to Resvoglar. Whereas if the insurance company had preferred Semglee, the pharmacist could make that substitution without first asking the physician or provider for permission. In Ohio, the pharmacist can only interchange to the interchangeable biosimilar if it results in a lower cost to the patient. They must notify the patient at the point of dispensing, and they must notify the provider within 5 business days. And just like brand name substitution, a provider can prevent substitution to an interchangeable biosimilar by writing something like dispense as written or brand medically necessary on the prescription. So to kind of bring to a close the presentation, I wanted to provide the landscape and the horizon of biosimilars, so what we have available and what's coming to the market soon. So currently on the market, we have biosimilars available to the biologic medicines listed in this chart. I've listed the number of biosimilars that are approved and the number of biosimilars available on the market for each molecule and reference product. As you can see, to date, most of the biosimilars that have been approved have been for oncology, hematology sort of indications, some rheumatology. Most of the time, specialists have been working in this field, but we're now seeing biosimilars coming to market for insulins as well, which is going to impact really a much larger percent of the population. There are a few medications that have biosimilars approved, but they're not yet available on the market. In particular is etanercept or Enbrel, or adalimumab or Humira. This situation can occur when the patent on the molecule runs out, but perhaps the patent on manufacturing techniques has not run out yet. Adalimumab in particular has 7 biosimilars approved, none available, but we expect quite a few of these biosimilars to hit the market next year. With Enbrel or etanercept, we have 2 biosimilars approved, none available, and we're not expecting to see any become available until towards the end of this decade. Lastly, is just a glimpse into the future of perhaps the biologic medicines that might have biosimilars come available soon. In particular, we see ophthalmology will be impacted. Aflibercept is a commonly used medication, and it does have biosimilars which have applied for FDA approval. Rheumatology has quite a few medications as well that are in phase 3 trials with their biosimilars. And also applied for FDA approval is insulin aspart biosimilar or Novolog, which again would really have the potential to impact a large number of patients. A couple other examples I've listed here in either phase 3 or even applied for FDA approval would be medications that would continue to impact, sort of our hematology landscape, our pulmonology landscape, our neurology landscape. Endocrine, there's really a large number of medications that are in the pipeline that have the potential to hopefully increase access to these medications. So finally, just to kind of review a couple key points. Biosimilar medications, they have the potential to reduce the cost of these highly effective biologic medicines. We see the cost of these medicines as a barrier to their uptake by payers, and which ultimately trickles down and impacts patients. And so biosimilar medications offer us the ability to have competition in the marketplace for these highly effective meds, which will help our healthcare dollars to go a little further and hopefully increase access to the meds for our patients. Ultimately, though, payer medication formularies will likely be choosing biosimilars or originator products, depending on the contracting and price. We might see formularies changing just like we do currently for preferred agents for whichever the payer and manufacturer can kind of come to the lowest price negotiated. So really our providers will continue to be liaisons between the patients and payers, just like you're doing now with prior authorizations and those sorts of requests. I would recommend to our providers to anticipate questions from patients if and when their insurance companies require product switching, which really is the impetus of today's presentation, to give a background and an overview to help our providers be more familiar with biosimilars for when those questions do come. Thank you.